I am so sorry. A growing number of physicians have made open apologies for their past recommendations to their patients where they encouraged low-fat, high-carbohydrate meals as a healthy lifestyle choice. I want to also add my sincere apologies to all my patients for the wrong advice that I have given over the years when I recommended a low-fat diet and largely ignored the dangers of processed foods, seed oils, grains, and refined carbohydrates. The accumulated evidence is, in my opinion, overwhelmingly in support of the value of a low carbohydrate diet with limited processed foods, seed oils, and grains. This is also ideally consumed in a fairly narrow eating window in order to decrease inflammation and insulin resistance, while also maximizing metabolic flexibility and autophagy. Over the last few years, there's been a revolution in our understanding of how major chronic diseases such as obesity and diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and stroke, dementia, and many cancers are all linked by underlying metabolic and longevity processes. And most importantly, that we can actually influence them through the choices that we make in our lives. I just started a family, I had 2 young kids, and I suddenly was diagnosed with 4 chronic diseases. And I went to my doctors and they gave me prescription medicines for each one that I took, thinking that they were treating the cause of the disease, when really they're only treating the symptoms.
Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm DC. Today I am talking to Dr. Robert Lufkin. Now, he is a medical school professor, a professor in radiology. He has written over 200 peer-reviewed papers. He's written 14 books, including his latest one, Lies I Taught in Medical School. This book is quite remarkable and so well written. It's just so easy for the average person to understand as well. And it starts with, I did everything right and almost died anyway. And this, I think, will really resonate with a lot of people, including myself. This book is, I thoroughly recommend. In fact, one title is, I Trusted the Science That Couldn't Be Trusted. And I think this title in particular will resonate with a lot of people for what's been going on for the last few years as well. So what makes a medical professor with over 200 peer-reviewed papers and 13 other books write a book entitled The Lies I Taught in Medical School? So tell me, what makes a professor in a medical school write a book, Lies I Taught in Medical School? How did you come to that yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question, because before I wrote the book, I essentially spent my entire career as a mainstream participant in the medical establishment. I was a medical school professor and still am at large medical schools here in California. And I, practiced medicine. I wrote papers, hundreds of peer-reviewed papers. I got millions of dollars of grants for my lab from drug companies, from the US government, from equipment makers. So I was, and I still am part of the system. But to your point, what forced me to change is what a lot of people face was that I was suddenly diagnosed with 4 diseases that were a complete surprise to me. And when that happened, it forced me, largely out of self-interest, really self-preservation, to begin questioning some of the beliefs that I had and that many of my colleagues still have about the way these diseases work.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think for most people it is a bit, like self-driven. How did I end up in this situation? and they try to work it out, and it all sort of steamrolls from there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, you must have had a lot of faith in the medical system yourself, and you're a doctor, you're teaching doctors.
Oh, absolutely. And I still have faith in the medical system. I think the Western medical system we have is unequaled in its power and state of achievement for certain things. If I get hit by a car, I don't want to necessarily focus on my lifestyle, although the lifestyle choices I make will make me heal better. But to save my life, I'm going to need a blood transfusion. I'm going to need my bones set, all those things. Or if I get an infectious disease, for certain infectious diseases, Western medicine is unequaled, an antibiotic or something like that. And the problem is when we take the successes of Western medicine and what it's really good at, and suddenly in the 21st century, the diseases we face are not really those anymore, although we still encounter them. But the big challenges are a different type of diseases that are chronic diseases, things like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, cancer, heart attack, stroke, Alzheimer's disease. And these diseases, unfortunately, don't respond to a pill or to surgery or a blood transfusion. In fact, that's the challenging part. So I trust the healthcare system. And when I was diagnosed with this diseases, the first thing I did was I went to my doctors and I said, I've got these diseases. What shall I do? And they prescribed medicines for me. And they said, lifestyle may sort of work, but really you need to understand you're going to be on these medicines for the rest of your life. So get used to it. And so I did follow the medical advice, but I realized, it wasn't going to end well knowing what I know about those diseases. And I began to question things and try different approaches.
Yeah, fair enough. So do you want to tell us these diseases that you were diagnosed with?
Sure. And first of all was a type of arthritis or joint disease called gout. Second was hypertension. Half of most adults have hypertension. It's a very common disease now. Prediabetes, which, almost half of people are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. And then finally, dyslipidemia, abnormal blood lipids. And so these are diseases that are very common that many people face. And the interesting thing is they were approached very differently. I went to sort of a different specialist for each one, or they said, hey, your arthritis is not linked to your hypertension. Those are different diseases. Get over it. And what I came to understand is that, which was very surprising to me, is that they are actually all linked and they all have a common root cause. And furthermore, the medicines I was being given, which were standard treatments, although they took care of the symptoms, they didn't actually change the underlying progression of the disease. So the disease was going to go on, and it might not bother me as much because the symptoms wouldn't be there, but the disease would progress. And that was very concerning because I wanted to fix the disease. So I began looking at alternatives that would address these root causes. And that was the wake-up call for me. And the book's about my process and how I did it, and I wanted to share my experience with everyone else because I was ultimately able to reverse these 4 diseases, get off all medications, and I think that knowledge isn't out there. People are still going to their doctors and being put on these medicines, which I'm not saying you shouldn't follow your doctor's advice. If you're put on a medicine, you should definitely take it. But what I'm saying is, as you look at options, there are other things you may want to consider other than just a lifetime of prescription medicines.
Yeah, exactly. I was exactly the same. This is the rest of your life sort of thing. It's only going to get worse from here. It's only going to progress. they've already been stage 4 twice. So, you know, how much worse can it get?
Yeah.
So there you go. But the book is called Lies I Taught in Medical School. And two of those conditions you said were different chapters in your book, the hypertension and diabetes. There's two of those lies. And you talk a lot about nutrition now too. Did you actually teach nutrition in medical school?
I did not. My background is in medical imaging, so that's my expertise. And in modern, in modern medicine, for better or worse, everyone is very specialized. Even the family practice people are sort of specialized in family practice, but you may be a neurosurgeon or an obstetrician or a radiologist. So, but fortunately, the specialty I was in, medical imaging, I am in, allowed me to have a very broad view of many different types of diseases. So I was able to look at plaques in the heart, in the vessels. I was able to see things in the brain, look at people's brains. I was, able to do different things. So it gave me a very wide opening. But nutrition actually isn't taught much in medical school, sadly. Even to this day, there's only minimum emphasis on nutrition. Instead, nutrition has been taken over, or has been is run by the nutrition scientists, basically by dietitians. And I, full confession, my mom was a dietitian, so I know what that's like. But in the book we talk about how scientific organizations and what we think are reputable scientific organizations like American Heart Association, American Diabetic Association, they like the doctors are corrupted by pernicious influences that does that. And so the diet organization, American Dietetic Association, was founded by someone with a sort of strong religious belief and a religious nutritional agenda. I mean, nothing against religion, but it shouldn't be driving our scientific choices. So there's the American Dietetic Association, the diet organization, the dietitians have a certain perspective on foods, to the point now that you go to their meetings and they're sponsored by Coca-Cola and McDonald's, and they're full of junk foods. And just like many of our other medical science societies are corrupted by big food influences and big pharma influences, and they can drive the agenda of these, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. And if anyone knows the history of the Dietetic Association, you can look up Belinda Fettke, her work with research into the Kellogg's and the cereal companies, things like that as well. That has a big effect, and the underlying sort of dogma that they push is all pushed us towards plant-based diets. So, what was your lifestyle and diet like before you were diagnosed then?
I was, actually growing up with my mom as a dietitian, we observed the food pyramid religiously. We were on a low fat diet, as most people were at the time, which we thought was healthy. So we substituted saturated fat in butter, and we replaced it with margarine, which is full of trans fats, and seed oils, pro-inflammatory things. We avoided egg yolks and instead chose low-fat yogurt, which is as a higher sugar content. So I was coming from that kind of diet. I mean, over the years, I've had many different diets. Personally, I was a vegetarian or vegan for almost 10 years. I've been a carnivore. I have to say, people ask me, well, what's your position on diets? Because diets are sort of polarized a little bit. It's almost like everything today is politics. The vegans don't talk to the carnivores. And I just want to say, I love my vegan friends. I love my carnivore friends. And I think you can be very healthy or very unhealthy on any kind of diet, all the way from vegan to carnivore. I think being healthy on a vegan diet is more challenging just because there's more plant-based junk food than there is animal-based junk food, but there still is animal-based junk food. But the thing is just to avoid the junk food and certain types of food, whether it's vegan or carnivore or anything in the middle, that drive inflammation and drive insulin resistance. And in my opinion, is it the root cause of all of these diseases that I faced, and many more of the chronic diseases that ultimately determine our longevity. So this is actually a longevity plan too, because if you slow down these diseases or reverse these diseases, you can look forward, and I think we all can look forward to living much longer. It used to be, people died at age 65 or 70. Now people are looking towards 100. It's not unrealistic that this population, people born today, are going to be living a long time, and people alive today.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. There are right ways and wrong ways to do any diet, and even carnivore diet. You can very easily do it the wrong way. Over supplementing for one thing, and just choosing the processed sort of foods and things like that. I was the same as well. I was very much the low fat diet. It didn't worry about processed foods, the seed oils and everything else, and that didn't end well either. So there you go. And of course, when it hits you, like you never think it's going to hit you, then you start doing the research, So, and you think you're doing the right thing, I guess, I imagine, like with you follow your mum's advice as well. Like, she's a dietitian, she must know what she's talking about, So you think you're doing everything right, and it still happens. So, yeah. Also in the book, talking about insulin resistance and other things. Also in the book, you talk about the TOR switch. Can you tell us what the TOR switch is and how that affects us in our lifestyle?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite topics. TOR is a protein that wasn't discovered until almost the beginning of the 21st century. So it's a relatively recent discovery, but in my opinion, it's arguably the single most significant signaling protein in all of biology. And it's evidence to how important it is. It's been conserved over billions of years. What does that mean? That the same protein is present in yeast all the way to human beings. It's so fundamental and so important. And I believe it's the basis for our longevity and a basic driver for all these chronic diseases that we influence with our lifestyle and other things. But basically, it's a switch that tells the cell to either grow or not grow. And how does it decide to do that? It detects the presence of nutrients. And by nutrients, the ones that TOR detects are glucose and oxygen and other nutrients to a lesser extent, but things like insulin also turn TOR on. And when TOR is turned on, it tells the cell to grow, which is a good thing. It's a healthy thing. The cell, reproduces and expands. It also turns on inflammation, because when nutrients are present, food's coming in, you want to watch out for foreign material. So your inflammation's turned on, and that's a good thing. Conversely, when there are periods of fasting or food is not available to the cell, then TOR switches the other way, and it tells the cell don't grow, but instead repair and do things called like autophagy, which means it repairs cell damage. It takes care of it cannibalizes things. It repairs itself, and it turns inflammation way down. So a healthy animal will have TOR turned on and off during its life, because both stages are healthy. But what happens in humans, partly because of our diet and partly with just aging, TOR tends to be turned on more and more all the time. And there's a theory of longevity and actually a mechanism that drives all the chronic diseases that we've just been talking about by having TOR turned on. In fact, there's experimental evidence. If you take a drug that actually turns TOR down, turns TOR off, you can have beneficial effects in all the chronic diseases I've mentioned, and even the phenotypes of aging, as well as improving literally the longevity of animals just by turning TOR to this off switch, off position for repair. So it's TOR, I think, is a fundamental switch that we're, quite honestly, we still don't understand. We're just beginning to understand it, but it's full of surprises, and it appears to be involved with almost all these chronic diseases and longevity itself.
Wow, that sounds really interesting, actually. But how is inflammation actually a good thing? How does the body use inflammation?
Yeah, it's almost like everything, it's the dose makes the poison, and it's sort of like stress. Stress can be good in the short term, but bad in the long term if it's chronic. So similarly, inflammation is life-saving. If we don't have inflammation, the organism can die. So think of acute inflammation. If I get stuck with a thorn, let's say, in my finger, the thorn is foreign material. It enters my body. Inflammation starts. So there's redness around the thorn. There's swelling. There's cells. Immune cells go there. White cells come, and they basically allow the body to heal. And then the inflammation turns off. That's a healthy short-term response, and that's good. Inflammation becomes unhealthy when it's turned on all the time. And there are processes in our body. As we age, inflammation increases. There are certain types of, we talked about seed oils that drive inflammation. Insulin resistance drives inflammation. Food itself drives inflammation. People are eating more and more all the time. So inflammation is being turned on. When chronic inflammation is present, it is at a root cause, and stress drives inflammation. Disordered sleep, exercise issues drive inflammation. So when inflammation is present in a chronic form, it can drive all these chronic diseases. Alzheimer's disease is at its root inflammation of the brain, an over response to things. Similarly, heart disease, inflammation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So that's great explanation, because a lot of people are, especially when they go on the carnivore diet, they try and keep inflammation down to a minimum. But there is a difference between good and bad inflammation, such as after exercise, it's part of the body's recovery phase as well. And autophagy, so the TOR switch actually helps with autophagy as well. That's incredible.
Yeah. When TOR is turned off, it activates cellular repair, which part of that process is autophagy and getting rid of senescent cells. And many people believe that's one of the powerful life extension mechanisms of turning TOR down, is you activate autophagy and get rid of senescent cells.
So another way to turn the TOR switch down is to fast. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you think about it, the TOR switch it's looking for nutrients. So by fasting, you turn down the amount of glucose, which is what turns TOR on. And by lowering, when you fast, you can switch your body's metabolism. You probably talked about this, from glucose to ketones. And when you switch to ketones don't turn TOR on to the extent that glucose does. So by fasting and switching to the state is called ketosis, and you can also do it with a ketogenic diet as well without actually fasting, get a similar effect, but you wind up turning the TOR switch onto the off position and then begin to get the benefits of autophagy and cellular repair.
Yeah, it's just quite a turnaround from, you're still teaching, but now you're also somewhat of a nutrition influencer. So it's quite a vast difference.
Yeah, and it's I think nutrition is arguably the most powerful of the lifestyle tools we have, and we get to do it every single day. When we wake up, we get to make choices. But I don't want to minimize the other lifestyle factors that I think can be equally important. Things like, sleep, quantity, quality, exercise, both brain and body exercise, and also stress, and ultimately mindset. How we look at the world. All those things are important. I guess my message is, certainly nutrition is good, but that lifestyle is empowering, and to reverse or prevent these chronic diseases, lifestyle is the most powerful tool we have, because the drugs and the surgeries, in most cases, in a lot of these diseases, just work on the symptoms. And that's, a lot of people aren't aware of that. They go in, they get a heart attack, and they get a stent in their blood vessels, and they think, well, that's taken care of. My heart disease is gone, when it's not. Basically, the stent, all it did was save their life from dying on the table, but it doesn't prevent them from, their heart disease continues. Basically, the blood vessels continue to get narrower and narrower. Even in the stent itself will reclot. So it's almost false hope that they get. But lifestyle will address all these things, and actually, in my opinion, will improve our longevity as well.
I agree. Diet, I think, is about 30% of it. The rest of it is all lifestyle. Your energy, you get, natural light, being outside, exercising. So movement is so important. And for me, like, lymphoma, correcting your lymphatic system, it's all about movement. As well, after diet, of course. But
yeah.
So, how long did this transition for you take? Like, you've gone from, I know you still have a lot of faith in the medical system, but you following the dietary guidelines, being vegetarian, and going, now you're basically just meat-based or low carb. How long did this transition take for you?
Yeah, it happened pretty fast. Once I understood what needed to be done, it's fairly easy to change. And I began intermittent fasting as well, and changing my diet types. It happens fast. Of the three things I avoid, carbohydrates and sugars, you can see the effect of that in 24 or 48 hours. You can immediately feel it. Things like grains, another thing I avoid, just for the inflammatory proteins and the weed killer on them. Those, it could take like 90 days to see the effect. So if you're going to cut out grains, and it's not like, oh, I tried it for a month, nothing happened. But so it can take longer. And then seed oils, of course, can take months to years, because they're stored in the body fat. So to adjust the effects of the seed oils, it's going to be a longer process. But for me, switching the diets was pretty quick.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I know a lot of people have trouble with that. And you see all the time. I tried this diet for a week, and this is the result. And it's like, you're not going to get any result in a week. It's crazy. And so the amount of body fat that you have will relate to how long the seed oils last in your body then?
That's a good question. It makes sense intuitively, but I don't know the answer. I haven't looked at that particular question. It's a good one.
I've heard that, and I've seen many times people say, like, the seed oils that they stay in the body for years, sometimes up to 2.5 years, like per dose sort of thing. But I think movement has a lot to do with it. Maybe exercise a little bit, and you also sweat out deuterium and things like that. So perhaps it may be quicker if you're athletic or move more, and depending on how much body fat you have, I'm not sure. So interesting. So the book is Lies I Taught in Medical School, and each chapter you have a lie is the title of the chapter. chapter 2, or actually chapter 1, I did everything right and almost died anyway. That's brilliant. That's like you read my mind in that one. Chapter 2, the metabolic lie. Chapter 3, the obesity lie. This is another interesting one for most people because obesity is such an epidemic around the world, or around the West anyway. The calories in versus calories out. This is something I tell people too. It's just a load of rubbish as well. So how did you, what brought you to this lie?
Well, and this will probably have to be our last question just because of the time, but yeah, the calories in equals calories out is a lie that, sadly still taught at the medical schools I teach at. It's still accepted by many physicians, but it's based on a misconception. And I think it harms people. It doesn't help them to lose weight. And the idea is that if you believe a calorie is a calorie, then it doesn't really matter what you eat. It's just how many calories you eat, right? And we know that intuitively not to be true. In other words, I can eat 100 calories of potato chips and they affect my body very differently than 100 calories of hard-boiled eggs. And the reason is that, as your listeners probably know, the 3 macronutrients, fat, the 2 macronutrients that are necessary for life, fat and protein, affect the body very differently than the 3rd group of macronutrients, which are interestingly not required for life. And there's some human populations that never eat it, but that's carbohydrates and sugar. When we eat that 3rd group, the carbohydrates and sugar, we drive a hormone called insulin, which tells our body to do some good things, but a lot of bad things. And some of those things are storing fat and also driving inflammation and turning on TOR. So the point is, if I eat 100 grams of potato chips, I will turn on insulin. I'll store maybe 50 grams of that, as an example, as fat, and then I'll only have 50 grams to use for energy, and I'll be hungry again. That's why I eat the whole bag of potato chips like everybody does. But with hard-boiled egg, if I eat 100 grams of hard-boiled egg, I don't turn on insulin to any appreciable amount. All that energy is available to me. I get 100 grams of energy. I feel fine. mTOR is not turned on, and I have plenty of energy, and I don't eat the rest of the dozen eggs in the container. So, the key to why a calorie is not a calorie is the effect on this critical, very important metabolic hormone called insulin.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So what's the difference between low calorie, say Diet Coca-Cola, to normal Coca-Cola then, the artificial sweeteners? Does that have the same effect?
In general, Jason Fung who wrote the foreword to the book. He famously said that the problem with even the calories, even the low calorie substitutes, is some of them, affect your gut flora. Some of them actually are carcinogenic in some studies. Yeah. Some of them, are much more benign and maybe a good substitute for you. But his philosophy is if the body senses sugar, it drives an insulin response. So there's a cephalic response for insulin, and that's what kind of drives that. But this has been great talking today, David. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks very much. Actually, I'd love to get through all of these chapters, especially chapter 8, but maybe perhaps another time.
Well, I'd love to come back on the program. And if anybody wants to download a free chapter of the book to see what it's like, you can go to my website, robertlufkinmd.com, and you can download the chapter and check it out.
I'll have all the links in the description for everyone to just click and link. And I thoroughly recommend it. And this was all we had time for in this conversation, but I will be talking to Dr. Lufkin again soon. So stay tuned for that one, because we'll be talking about the cancer lie, the Alzheimer's lie, and more.